Lost in the woods. I was lost in the woods. It had been a good plan. My friend and I decided to go hiking in Yorkshire, England, from one bed and breakfast to another. Yorkshire. They don't even have very many woods in Yorkshire. And we were lost in the woods. We had a guidebook that showed us all these wonderful walking trails, and the guidebook was completely unreliable. In fact, it was so bad that when we got back to the United States, we ceremonially burned it. And I had taken the precaution of getting as well a detailed topographical map, but the map was useless as fog closed in and we could barely see where our next step might go. And then it started to rain. And it was very cold. And so there we were, at risk of hypothermia, lost in the woods, with a map that was essentially useless. We found a little sheltered spot where we were able to look at the map again without rain actually falling on it. And I realized that there was only one thing to do, because we couldn't find any landmarks around us that looked like what was on the map. But there was on the map a small town just a little bit northwest of where we thought we were. And so I took the compass and I lined it up so that I could hold it right here under my chin and walk one step at a time in the direction that it pointed. And I was clutching that compass so hard because I was terrified. Now, obviously, I made it out of the woods, but it's hard to convey how afraid I was. We were already cold, and we really couldn't see where we were going, and we were lost. So I held onto that compass like it was a lifeline, and it was. It was. We guided our steps by the compass, and in not too much longer, a short amount of time really, we came out of the woods and clearly on a road into the town, where we were able to find a restaurant and shed some of our really wet clothes and warm up and get hot food inside us, and we did not die of hypothermia. It's hard to trust that things will work out. But Yolo Akili says that we have to look to our inner compass. And that doesn't mean that things will work out, but at least it sets us moving in a direction. It's a guide. And this idea of trusting in that inner compass requires a certain amount of spiritual audacity. Because, you know, our lives are a lot like being lost in the woods. We only see a tiny piece of all that is. Despite the constant influx of news, we really only see a tiny part of it. And it's hard sometimes to know where to place our feet. But to people like Yolo Akili, all those people who follow their inner compass, we are all simultaneously and in harmony responding as if we feel the trembling strands of the web that holds us all. Yolo Akili urges us to remember that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves, that we're the universe, that energy isn't created or destroyed, it can only be transformed, and we are together building and transforming the universe. Yolo's message is to remember that each of us has that inner compass, a pole star that can lead us to positive transformation, a compass that when we're lost in the woods of confusion and longing will always point in the right direction. Now, I recognize that some might say YOLO has a bit of a Pollyanna philosophy. Things will work out, it'll all be fine. But this isn't. a Pollyanna philosophy, and YOLO is not Pollyanna. YOLO is a black gay man helping other black men in this society where there is such structural racial injustice to find their way despite the traumas that plague their childhood and still have a grip. Now, he would be the first to say that trusting to the inner compass is a mental health strategy, because it is. But it also is a strategy that works. And when we look around at our society sometimes really seems to be lost in the woods, and sometimes the injustices of our society and the suffering around us is just too much, and we want to tune it all out because the challenges seem insurmountable. But if we trust the web, they are not insurmountable. Candace Payne is a 34-year-old real estate broker in Chicago. She describes herself as just a little black girl from the South Side. And when the polar vortex hit the Windy City last week, Candace arranged for 30 hotel rooms for the homeless during the minus 50-degree weather. And paying for it and for some other supplies that she got, some food and some other things, she said was not the accomplishment. She put it on her credit card, she said, $4,700 is what she's spent so far. But the hard part was deciding to do something. The hard part was deciding to create shelter where there was none, deciding that she would move in that direction where her inner compass pointed her. So she reserved the first 30 rooms. And then she went on Instagram to ask people to pick up the homeless families from the tent city and gathered this caravan of people in their personal vehicles who went to the outdoor tent city by the interstate and got people into the cars and said, we're going to take you to a hotel. And gathering supplies was part of the process, and arranging for local restaurants to donate meals. But it didn't stop there. The hotel reduced its rates and provided more rooms. People started calling the hotel and paying for rooms. People donated money and useful stuff. And it started as Candace's idea of 30 rooms for a night or two. And it became 70 rooms for almost a week. Thanks to Instagram, people from all over the world have so far donated $10,000 for this one small slice of action in the face of suffering. More than 100 people have found shelter thanks to Candace Payne and her compass. And that includes children and pregnant moms-to-be. Now Candace is thinking about a more systematic solution to homelessness. She recalls that when she first responded to this inner compass saying, I've got to do something, I'll rent some hotel rooms, she says she thought it was unattainable to do just that much. But now, she says, after seeing what people from all around the world could accomplish, it tells me that it's not unattainable. We can all do this together. Trusting the web. Trusting that there are other hopeful, compassionate people, good people in the world who are all trying to make things better. People who want to do good and be good. Trusting that they're out there making a difference, even if what they're doing isn't immediately visible. And it's about trusting that inner compass, which means noticing and being reflective, the way Candace noticed how cold it was going to be, and she thought about homeless people, and asking what feels right, what feels wrong, who is being helped, who is harmed by any action I might take. Constantly returning to values, going back to the core of who I am, finding that center and living from it, following that inner compass. Brian Greene is a quantum physicist, and I suppose it's interesting in my own experience that his ideas about the way the quantum reality works dovetail amazingly with Yolo Achilles' notions about finding the inner compass and following it. Greene says that reality is linked to probabilities, and somewhere and sometimes even the very unlikely things can happen. In one of his videos on Discovery or Nova, can't remember which one it is, but he has, as an illustration of this point, a scene where he walks through a wall. Now, the point isn't that we should all try to walk through walls. It's not really a safe activity. But the point is to find the right direction and start moving. And so even if the attitudes that we create when we follow that inner compass are small changes in us, they may be as small as changes at the quantum level. What we do can make a difference. What Candace Payne did made a difference, and it inspired others to make a difference too. Sometimes we can be lost in the woods of our own lives, wondering how we ended up doing what we do, and longing for something different. And maybe we don't stop to check that inner compass. Maybe we haven't looked in a long time for that inner compass because we're afraid of what we might discover. Sometimes it takes a shock, like losing a job, to reassess what we're doing and what our new direction might be. For me, it was a sermon at a Unitarian church that asked me this question: what work would express your core values? If you could do anything, what would you do? Well, I have to admit, the first thing I thought was, if I could do anything, I would be a professional baseball player. But it did seem to me that I was probably a little too old for that, and probably at our time and place, the wrong gender. And then there was the fact that I really have no skill whatsoever at baseball. But the what work would express your core values, and if you could do anything, if the boundaries were off, what would you do? And the answer was, I'd be a Unitarian minister. Now, I resisted this idea strongly. It seemed ridiculous to me. After all, I had a law degree. Surely I could find something in the legal field that would answer this calling to live my core values. But once the idea had appeared in my mind, it was impossible to evade. So, checking that inner compass, I started moving in that direction, thinking to myself, I can't see how this is possible, but I can at least begin the process. And it was amazing how the path cleared before me. Just before I was supposed to start at Harvard Divinity School, I checked my budget, and everything was in place, everything was covered except the cost of a place to live. Now, I was at the time living just outside of Washington, D.C., and my daughter really did not want to move anywhere. And so I had discovered that there was a $74 round-trip fare that in fact lasted all the time I needed it to. So that had taken care of the whole transportation. I really only needed a couple of nights a week as I clumped my classes together, but I couldn't pay for it. I couldn't figure out how to pay for it. And then a little later, maybe a day later, my phone rang, and it was a friend of mine who lived in Belmont, Massachusetts, just outside of Cambridge, where Harvard is. And she said, hey, you said you were thinking of going to Harvard Divinity School. I just wanted to say, when you come up here, you can stay with me. No charge. And so that problem was solved. And it was like this the whole way. I couldn't solve the problems that I saw. I just simply did whatever legwork I could do to work on them, and I just kept moving, following that inner compass. And I remember, this was not easy. I remember one evening in the Boston airport, sitting in the food court, thinking about the things I had yet to do, those hurdles in the process. And it was so discouraging that I put my head down on the table, pushed my pizza aside, and I wept there in the food court at the airport. And what's really interesting, looking back, is I don't even remember what the problem was, because somehow it got solved. Somehow things changed, and I was able to get over that hurdle and all the others. But in that moment, I so longed to become a minister. I so did not want to give up that inner longing where my inner compass was pointing. I couldn't see a way forward, and the challenges seemed insurmountable. Yet for each obstacle, there came a solution. The universe is stranger and more interconnected and more responsive than we dare to believe. But the cool thing is that it doesn't really matter whether or not we believe. All we have to do is find that inner compass and start moving in the right direction. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't other things that can happen, and it doesn't mean that we're trusting blindly in everything's going to work out fine. I mean, you know, it's not like we could just throw up our hands and say, oh, the government will take care of it for us. We who wish to be good and do good are in an interconnected web. We don't always see it, but we're always a part of it. And if I had to explain this whole inner compass thing, I'd say that anchoring action to that inner compass, to values, gives life a direction and leads to transformation. And as I am transformed, and maybe it's so tiny it's at the quantum level, the people I know are affected by the ways in which I've changed. I change, the changes in me affect you, and you change. And the changes in you affect others. All of these changes, this cascade of changes, sets something in motion that wasn't in motion before. That's what Candace Payne did when she made the decision she had to do something about homeless people who were about to be sleeping in 50 below zero wind chills. And she picked up the phone and reserved some rooms at a hotel. And then she invited others in. In her words, she said, I am a regular person. It all sounds like a rich person did this, but I'm just a little black girl from the South Side. And it was her taking those initial steps and inviting others in that made a big enough difference to be noticeable. So, for each of us in our own lives, for us as a church community in the larger world, there are woods all around us, and we can get lost. But there's also a web of interconnected promise. We are the universe. We are the universe. Together, we can find our way.